Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my VermiBag Mini preparing to check in on our red wigglers that have been in this system now for 274 days. 12 days have passed since the last time we came in here to give them feeding number 22. And I think it was over the past couple feedings that we've been cautious to pay attention to see what we see when we come in here, because I have been greeted by swarms of flying insects, and I wouldn't call it a swarm, but I've definitely seen one or two buzzing around in my face ever since I opened this thing, and there's kind of a distinct look to their glossy little wings showing up. You could see them moving. I'm sure there's many more of them, and I'm not sure if they're even showing up on the camera, but I definitely spotted about 6 or 7 flying insects. So what we've been doing, we've been taking my mix over here of the BTI mosquito dunks solution, and before stirring the contents of the system around, I want to just treat the top layer where the flying insects actually are, because that's what this stuff is meant to do, is to eliminate mosquitoes, the mosquito dunks solution. But this is the use of the same stuff to try to tackle the little flying insects. And I always wonder how much of this stuff I really need to put in. It serves as a bacteria, it functions as a bacteria. So I don't know if just a little bit is enough. Besides that, my squirt bottle seems to be a little temperamental today. I might have to give it a little shot of oil on the plunger. So, the last feeding, 12 days ago, to me, I don't even remember exactly what we fed, but there was one clear standout thing. It was this huge chunk of bread. Now it's coming back to me. I think there was some cabbage in there and a few other things, but the main event, I think, was just this really big piece of moldy bread, which I had soaked prior to the check-in and tried to crumble it up too as we were applying it, giving it to the worms in little fragments instead of just one big piece of moldy bread for them. But before we dig down into the middle to see how that last feeding is coming along, I figured we'd do a quick lap around the outer edge, because that's been where we've been finding a little bit excess dryness. And we've come in here once or twice with my squirt bottle just to dampen up what's happening on the outer edges. And as long as we've got this thing kind of opened up, I'm coming back in now with my pressurized squirt bottle. And I'm not even sure if there's pressure in it. There seems to be a little bit of pressure in here, with which we should be able to drop in a little bit of moisture. It doesn't seem dire at all. I just figured as long as we've already excavated a little bit and I was encountering little bits of dry material, let's just dampen it a little bit as long as we're here, and then we can see how they're coming along on their last meal. Let's dig in. Down the middle now, we've already encountered little bits and pieces of different things. This is like the chunk of a gourd. I thought what I saw down here was, here's like the stem of a pumpkin, a pretty good size object, which will take a pretty good amount of time to break down. This is another stem of a pumpkin, if I'm not mistaken. So there is all kinds of chunks of very slow composting food items floating around in here, because we put in some gourds, we put in some pumpkin stems, and we keep bumping into those things over and over every time we come in here. And if I'm not careful, I have a tendency to break them. I thought I just heard something crack as my finger sort of raked through the material. So I'm not going too much out of my way to avoid breaking the things that are in here. Like, there we go. I just broke this fairly decent size chunk of gourd into 2 pieces just by swinging it a little bit too hard. So it's a pretty good example of how fragile a lot of this stuff is becoming over time. Some of it's holding out quite nicely, like the pumpkin stems really do seem to hold out, but these gourds, this one gourd's really holding together good, must say. And I guess those are kind of the famous last words sort of statements. Hopefully we don't end up crushing it. I do my best to try to see if we can get one more round out of one of these things before it gets broken up further and further. But that big gourd with the hole in the side of it, that's been one of the key things that we check in on every time in here. And then this right here goes back way further than the gourd. Stem of a pumpkin, a fairly large stem of what had been a fairly large pumpkin. And various other bits and pieces of stuff. This to me seems like a chunk of cantaloupe melon. And I wonder if that could have come out of the gourd as I shook its contents out. Or am I getting it mixed up with something else? I know I fed a lot of citrus. Perhaps what I'm actually sensing there is citrus. Lime. Maybe that's what that is. Now it's coming back to me even more. There was the peels of some oranges and some half limes thrown in here too as part of the last feeding. This is a piece of gourd that I've resisted the urge to just crack, because it's this tubular piece where the end of it is just this little nub. And I know there's worms hanging out right there inside the thing. But I can never seem to shake loose the contents of that thing. That thing, it seems to me, has also got to be, going soon. It's going to have to break. I can't imagine that it could resist for much longer. But I'm not going to handle it rough. I'm going to see if I can help it survive one more check-in as a whole object. But just like everything else, it'll eventually turn into little scraps and shreds and mix in and get consumed. I really like the moisture level down here in the middle where the foods have been. And now it's probably pretty comparable to all that dampened stuff on the outer edge. I got my prepared bedding here, which a little different from last time. I bought in some totally unprepared bedding last time, which was just some dry stuff. This batch of prepared bedding is super, super damp. Way more wet than it typically is when I'm preparing a batch of this stuff. So I guess in this system we do seem to like to give them juicy stuff and supplement the moisture when we can using the spray bottles. So I am kind of glad to see that, well, I don't know. I'm definitely still seeing the flying insects. So I don't think we're out of the woods with them yet. So I'm going to keep applying this stuff until I see no more signs of them hanging out in here. So we gave it a little squirt in the beginning, and I think we'll apply a little bit more at the end too. The feeding, you can see there's Brussels sprout, there's mushroom, there's apple peel, and a couple other things. From what I remember, there was some sort of a large stem in here. But it's a pretty nice feeding, I must say. A banana peel as well. So I got a feeling they're going to appreciate that. And sometimes I want to put these old food objects in prior to putting the fresh food in, so that the yummy foods that we're giving them end up on top of these slow composting objects, hopefully resulting in getting a lot more traffic due to the yummy foods being placed right there. But somehow I always forget to do these little things, and then we just try to position them out on the surface carefully. You might have heard that too. There's always like a little crack lately every time I'm attempting to gently handle this stuff. It seems to crack. All right, so we're going to see if we could just get a little tiny bit more of this BTI sprayed in here. I think I'm going to have to get a little tiny drop of oil down into this little plastic cylinder to help the mechanism spring back every time I dispense a shot, because waiting for that next recoil of the trigger is a drag, I must say. So I'm tempted, we've got this really lovely bedding. Why not just give them a little bit more right over the top of the feeding? And you know, I positioned a couple other things way over on the other edge of the table, totally out of reach, but let's give them some grit and some worm chow. I wonder if I could dispense them both. Well, a lot of grit came out. Virtually no worm chow. So let's make sure we give them some worm chow too. Alright. Just like to apply the grit once in a while. And the worm chow, it's always kind of nice to be doing away with that stuff too. Alright. Definitely still bumping into large objects, such as this other stem of pumpkin. We've probably seen quite a few at this point. Definitely seems to make good sense to keep as much of this stuff submerged a little bit just under the surface, so that, you know, if a little drying starts to occur, the stuff that we want to see a lot of action in is usually set back from the surface a little bit. So we're just going to do our best to keep the worm activity chugging along. So let's see, what else do we have? I think that's about it, but I thought we would also use a couple pieces of soiled paper that I have. Top covering papers seem to be a mainstay in almost all of my systems, but for some reason I don't really do a whole lot of it here. Not to mention I don't use feeding zone indicators down here in the VermiBag either. I don't know why. Perhaps it's just because I got to come all the way to this end of the table to work on this system, and then all the things that I use on a regular basis are just a little bit out of reach or something. I don't know. But I think finding the feeding in a system like this is pretty straightforward, considering its sort of shape, symmetric shape. It's most likely going to be down the middle. Alright everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Sorry, just tried to catch a flying insect. Alright everyone, have a great day. Bye now.